Hi everyone, welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. So as you probably know, it's currently September, and some other YouTubers and I are getting together and calling it Sep-Tandy. Basically, we're going to focus on videos specializing in Tandy Radio Shack computers. So that really means we're focusing on TRS-80 computers from the Model 1 all the way up to the Model 4, and color computers like the Coco 1 through 3, and of course, some of my favorites, the Tandy 1000 line. Today we're going to take a look at this Tandy 1000HX. These machines come with one floppy drive standard, and I thought this extra drive bay right here is perfect for putting a Gotek in this. Now normally you wouldn't be seeing a video about that because you simply open the machine and put the Gotek in, but with these machines it's not quite that simple due to some non-standard things that Tandy did. So let's get right to it. Alright, first let's just take a quick look at this machine. So it's just like the Tandy 1000EX, which you've seen on some of my previous videos. I'll put a link in the description to those. But the difference is instead of one 5 1/4 inch disk drive being on the side here, coming out of the right side, it has two 3.5 inch bays that take up the same space inside the machine. And it sort of cuts into the case here to expose the two drives, which in my opinion isn't quite as nice looking as the Tandy 1000EX. Tandy did a couple other things to it. First of all, they added a ROM that actually self-boots the machine. So notice I had no disk in there, and it very quickly shows this menu, and I've hit escape, where actually there's a little bit of a C prompt here. There's actually just command comm and some very minor stuff installed on here, so very little free space. But it is kind of nice that it does boot the computer up without any kind of need for a disk. You got MS-DOS 2.11, and that means that even with one floppy drive, you can put in a game disk, for instance, and run it without any issue. Otherwise, the specs are very similar. Same speed CPU, a little over 7 megahertz. This has 256K of RAM built in. It lacks the DMA controller that's used for the floppy drive, so you need that very hard to find memory expansion card if you want to go above 256K. I have a Tandy boot disk here that's 720K. Let's stick that in and Control-Alt-Delete. So this boot menu here shows what's on the disk, which is interesting. I have some stuff on here, but I do have DeskMate on this floppy disk, and if we hit F1, it will run DeskMate. And this is DeskMate 1.0, which is nice because it's the old original version from 1986. It also runs on machines that only have 256K like this. So I won't talk too much about DeskMate in this video, but I gotta say it's pretty damn cool considering this machine came out in '86. The fact that you could run this multi-function word processor, text editor, database, calendar kind of utility is quite nice. And I'm not positive if this was included with Tandys when you bought them or not, but if it was, that was a really good value add. Now, in case you're not familiar with what a Gotek is, it's this thing right here. It's basically a floppy drive emulator for the SugarArt drive interface. It's most famously used on the IBM PC line of computers, including the Tandy 1000, but also lots of other machines use a very similar interface, which means these are compatible with all sorts of things, the Amiga, Atari ST, Color Computer, TRS-80s, stuff like that. I buy these from eBay, and I'll put a link in the description below to them, but they're always changing, like the sellers and stuff, but you just type in Gotek floppy emulator and you'll find these. They're very inexpensive and it allows you to plug a USB stick into the front and essentially select which disk image you want to use, and then it will output that and emulate that disk for the computer you have it plugged into. Now you notice this one is black, and the cheapest ones you can find online are all black. There are some that are beige that are different colors, like white, but they're much more expensive for some reason. So what I do, I just use spray paint like this Rust-Oleum here. This is called Satin Smoky Beige, and I just spray paint the front of the Gotek. Now, it's not a perfect match because this machine is kind of a creamier white color than beige, but I find it pretty close, and if it bothers me, I can just go buy some different spray paint. This stuff is inexpensive, and change the color of this at any time. So when you buy these right from the factory, they only support emulating 1.44 megabyte disks. Now you'll see on eBay there are some that do other formats, but they're more expensive. So go ahead and buy the very cheapest one, and then you can flash new firmware onto this that will be able to emulate any kind of disk that this interface supports. Alright, so just search for FlashFloppy and it will take you right to the GitHub page for the project. It's open source, obviously, as you could tell. And what's really important, let's take a look at the wiki. The wiki is going to kind of tell you how to download the firmware and how to flash it. When we look here, we're going to download the current version, download FlashFloppy. We're going to get the stable version. And we look at firmware programming. So there's a couple of different ways to do it, and I personally always use method 1 serial programming. Basically, you're going to use one of these USB to TTL serial converters. They're very cheap, and it gives you a link to the get one if you don't have one, but you can find them everywhere on eBay. And we essentially have to install a couple pin headers onto the board, and we'll power it from the little USB device, and we'll hook the serial TX and RX lines and install a jumper, and that will allow us to do all the programming we need. So to take apart a Gotek, you just remove the 3 screws that hold the cover on. Make sure you unplug everything, like the power connector. God, those are hard to get off. Take these display cable pins off. So there we go, there's the board. I already cut some pin headers here. We're going to solder that on to the serial connection, which is right there. Lots of people have recommended I use blue tack to try to hold stuff down when I'm soldering it on, so I had some already, and I love this stuff. I forgot how cool it is. There we go, just like that, held in. Now I can flip this over and they don't fall out. Okay, this is what I'm going to use to do the programming. These are pretty cheap. I think it's an FTDI, but it's a clone. So you need to make sure you have it set for 3.3 volts because that's what this thing runs at. But remember, we are connecting the 5 volts to this. So this particular board, I have an extra pin soldered on there, and that's for the 5 volts. I probably did that for programming one of these in the past. Okay, everything is connected as it describes it on that page. Ignore the colors of the wires. Not really using the color coding. So the ground is, I think, this orange wire, for instance. Let's take a look at how we program the firmware now with Windows. All right, so the link here says we need to check the Cortex firmware webpage to how to program this on Windows. All right, so this seems to be for another firmware for this called the HXC firmware, which is a paid one. What is this crap at the top? Anyways, wow, this is really slow. This is similar to the FlashFloppy. FlashFloppy is open source and, of course, free. This one is older and has more features, but of course you do have to pay, I think it's 10 euros per Gotek. You can use this firmware as well. Wow, there's so many ads on this page that it's completely screwed it up, and I can't scroll or do anything. I can't select. It's completely unresponsive. Honestly, I can see why people use ad blockers, because when there are so many ads and so much crap JavaScript on a web page, you can't actually work. Sorry, it's really frustrating. Look at all this crap that's loading here. This is all like ad stuff. Okay, so let's try that again. This time I have an ad blocker running. Let's see if I can actually use this page now. Yeah, look at that. It's working. It actually scrolls and works properly. How shocking. So we scroll down through this page. I'm pretty sure this is the one we need here. The ST Flash Loader software. Okay, wow, this page is pretty crap as well, but here it is. Get software. I just scroll down. License agreement. Oh, you gotta register. How ridiculous. How freaking ridiculous. Anyways, on the web page here, shows you how to set up the serial port. So even, disable, okay, I have it on the same. Let's hit next. Hit remove protection. Okay, that's fine. TM128K, so it's all matching at this point. All right, and we're gonna say download to device, and we're gonna pick a file. All right, so I unzipped FlashFloppy that I downloaded from the GitHub, and there's the hex file. So we double click that. And we'll just check these other check boxes here. Verify after download. Select it. Okay, and then we hit next. Let's see what happens. On the little serial adapter, we get the little blinky lights. Nothing's really happening on the Gotek itself, but that's normal. It doesn't have any LEDs except for one simple one. Successfully downloaded, so I guess we're good now. All right, it's remounted in the case with the screen hooked up. Now I'm gonna still power it up off this. I've removed the jumper and these extra serial cables, so let's power it up from this board. So you see it now shows FF. That shows FlashFloppy is installed and working fine on this. Now, one thing is that firmware update process is a little bit of a pain, especially because once this is mounted in the computer, it'll be very difficult. Luckily, FlashFloppy has update provisions by just putting the new firmware on a USB thumb drive and sticking it in the front, and it will update itself that way. Check out that GitHub page for more information on that. All right, we aren't completely done. if you go back to the FlashFloppy GitHub and we look for host platforms, in here, it's going to tell you how to configure the jumpers on the Gotek itself. We're going to click IBM PC. That way we can configure this thing and put it back inside the Tandy. It says to add the select line S1 on the Gotek. Now this is like drive select 1. Most PC floppy drives are always selected as 1, and the twist in the cable is what determines if it's drive, A or B, or 0 or 1. I think the Tandy, and I haven't opened up the HX yet, but if it's anything like the other Tandys, it doesn't use the twist in the cable, and instead it does rely on the jumper setting. So if we want the Gotek to be drive A, or the first drive, we need to set it for S0, and if we want it to be the second drive, we need to be S1. I want it to be the second drive, so I'm going to put it as S1. So I see that the S1 is already set. Let's crack open the Tandy. Now interesting is it has little pictures that show you how long the screws are. The screws are out. Let's flip this back over onto its bottom again. Top lift cover lifts off, but before we do that, there's a couple more screws inside. So we have to remove the expansion cover, which is this thing right here. And sometimes people really struggle. They're like, how does this come off? The trick is you just push right there and you slide. There's a little bit of a catch. To put it back on, just go like that. But people sometimes try to pry it open with screwdrivers. You just push down right in that spot, and then you just slide it and it comes right off. So inside here there are some more screws right there, and there's another one right here. So I think at this point the top cover should come right off. So you just sort of lift it off carefully. So take out the keyboard, it's really easy, but I don't think I'm gonna need to do it. You just take out these two screws and this lifts out. This is the first time I'm taking this apart myself, so I'm just gonna start removing screws and let's see what we can get to. I'm just trying to get to where the floppy drive is, and hopefully there's a cable that's just sitting there waiting to accept the new Gotek drive. Let's try taking these things out back here. There's these two really long looking screws. Ah, look at that. That sort of released this floppy mechanism. Okay, there's the other one, it fell out. Ah, there's an extra cable right here, perfect. Anyhow, if you notice, there's something missing here from the floppy drive. There is no power connector. Tandy is notorious for doing this. They supply power to the disk drive through the ribbon cable. So you cannot just take a standard floppy drive and put it in here and connect this cable up, because 5 and 12 volts run through this cable, or at least 5 volts, into some extra pins on here, and it will either short out the motherboard or short out the drive. So we are going to have to take care of that first. Now if you notice also, there's no twist. The connector that goes to the motherboard's in the middle, and both of these are straight through. So one of the drives has to be set to drive select 0, and one has to be set to drive select 1. And remember on the Gotek, we made it as drive select 1. So let's figure out how the power is getting from the motherboard on this connector into the disk drives. On the left here, I have the Tandy service manual, and on the right is the standard PC style floppy interface cable. You can clearly see that typically 1 through 33 on a normal connector is all just ground. But look on the Tandy, we have 5 volt and 12 volt pins here. Now we can obviously cut these wires going to the connector on the Tandy, and then we'll just send one of these 5 volt ones into the Gotek. But the problem is that will alter this cable forever, and if I do want to, say move the Tandy stock drive over to the other side, I'll need to remake a floppy cable, etc., etc. So really all I need to do is remove pins 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 29, 31, and 33 from the Gotek. We'll still be getting the normal ground and signals that it needs, and that means I can use the Gotek at any time, even on a standard computer. If I take it out of the Tandy and put it on a regular PC, it will still continue to work without an issue. Alright, to get the job done, I'm just going to use some side cutters. I'm going to cut the first 6 pins off on this side, and I'm going to cut the last 3 pins off on that side. I want to make sure I cut it as close to the connector as possible. You get the cutter on there like that, and we're going to put my finger on it so it doesn't go flying. So there we go, those are all cut off. So now this is now Tandy compatible, except we're still missing the 5 volt power input. So I was just thinking about the 5 volt power the Gotek needs, and I had another idea. There's holes on the PCB where the original power connector would have been soldered on, and this is if this thing was being powered normally off of a power connector. And I wouldn't be surprised if the 5 volts that's fed from this cable is actually available right there on that header. So this is where the power connector goes, and there's actually, it's marked plus 5 volts right here. And then here's the floppy connector. So if I put my probe on what would be the 5 volt pin on the normal floppy connector, and I touch the pins that go with 5 volts on here, so that would be pins 5 and 7. So here's 5, that's continuity, 7, 11. Yep, so as I expected, the floppy cable pins are wired directly up to here. So if I add the normal floppy connector right onto here, then I can just use one of these little jumper links to just jump the power directly over to the other thing. That's perfect. I like this idea. So I have this little right angle connector here. I have the desoldering iron warming up. I'm gonna try to suck the solder out of the PCB for those holes and install this. That way I can just use a quick jumper link with the DuPont connectors. Very easy and quick. All right, we now have some holes there. All right, let's see if I can get this in to this spot. It's a bit tricky. So it's in there. A couple of the pins got a little bent, but I can fix that. So it's installed the pin header, and it's sticking through the holes. So I'm just heating up the soldering iron, and let's get this soldered in here. So the Gotek is now connected to the cable. I just had to fold the cable in the right way to get it in the right orientation. Interesting is on the Sony drive, pin 1 is over on this side, and on the Gotek, pin 1 is over on this side. Now I did notice that they're using a non-standard faceplate height and depth. So the Gotek is gonna not quite fit perfectly. There will be a little bit of the gap on the top and bottom. The only way to really fix that is to print an entire new Gotek mount with the larger faceplate opening. This is a lot like the Amiga 2000. It also uses what looks like a standard disk drive, but the faceplate is higher. So when you add a typical PC drive, you do end up with a gap there. And then the final part is we need to connect the power connector from here up to the power connector I've added to this drive. Let's use this little jumper cable I just happen to have lying around. We will connect a ground pin, the gray wire, and the purple one is going to be 5 volts. So on a standard floppy cable, it's even labeled on the board, 5 volts is on the left, 5 volts, and then the 2 middle pins are ground, and then 12 volts isn't used on the Gotek at all. The ground and the 5 volts are connected, and the power is now getting to the Gotek. All right, and before we button this thing up, I just need to test this. So I'm gonna unplug the power cable off the Gotek. All right, so when I turn this on, this is stuck in a hole here like that. I should get 5 volts. 5 volts exactly. Awesome. And it also turned on without exploding. Well, that's a good sign. So I plug this into the Gotek here and here. When I turn this on, the Gotek should light up and work. FlashFloppy. Yes, it's working. All right, so now I need to put the shield on and kind of button this up a little more so we can do further testing. All right, so this is all mounted in here. Now, word of caution. So this is the floppy cable. Normally, the wire that's marked, say red or blue, like there's a blue wire on one side, that's pin 1. But thank you, Radio Shack Tandy, for doing it backwards. And of course, being backwards is normally not a big deal on the floppy interface. It just grounds out some of the 5 volt pins and you don't get it working. On this, if you have it backwards, you're gonna send 12 volts directly into the Gotek. On the Gotek, pin 1 is the one on the side here that's facing the power connector, but I had to flip the cable around so the blue stripe is on this side. It is extremely important to make sure that you have the correct cable orientation and to make sure the connector is perfectly aligned with the Gotek. The pin 1 stripe was on the wrong side on my machine, so you must manually check before powering the machine up. If you don't heed this warning, you may damage your machine or the Gotek. Now, unfortunately for me, I actually powered this up with it on the wrong way, and that sent 12 volts into the Gotek pins. I'm not sure which ones. I have no idea if it killed the Gotek or not. We're gonna plug it in and we're gonna test it out. So the Gotek is still powering up. As far as if it's even working, I don't really know. Let's plug the monitor in and let's just give this a test. I don't know what's on here, to be honest, but all right, so at least it's reading it. What does that O mean? So if I put a disk in the disk drive, it should be working fine. Yeah, so it's reading the regular floppy disk fine. So the computer wasn't damaged, this floppy drive wasn't damaged. As far as I can tell, the Gotek was damaged. So I've been troubleshooting this Gotek for a few hours. It seems to want to work. The drive select light comes on, but I have flashed another one because no matter what I do, the computer will not see this one. So let's yank this thing out of here and reinstall a brand new one. All right, so let's turn it on. FlashFloppy looks just like the other one. Ignore this horrible flash drive I have in here. So with the Tandy 1000HX, unlike the EX and the earlier Tandys, there's an EEPROM on this machine which holds some of the configuration data. So you need to copy the program called SETUPHX onto your A drive. And what it does is it detects your disks. So when you run this program after making a disk drive change, it will now show the way the drives are configured. Now you can have an external 5 1/4 inch disk drive as well. When I was running this program with the other Gotek, the one that I killed, this screen never came up and it would just basically go straight to this screen, which is the usual setup utility. And this is where you configure if you want the menu to show up when you turn it on or not. You can have memory diagnostics, yes or no. It was set to no, so I changed that to yes. And now we hit F1 to update the EEPROM, and theoretically this should be working now. I might have to reboot one more time. Let's just do that just to be safe. I can't believe so much time spent diagnosing this. Drive 0, I think I copied the game Thexter on here, so I hit B, DIR, and it works. Thexter. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Shows you what track is being read. And the game is loading, although it looks like it kind of crapped out. Alright, so let's button this machine up so I can finish this video. So it's pretty nice. This is the extra front cover for the disk drive hole that I'm going to need to take off. And look, there's a nice little screw here. So I'm going to take this off and I will leave it inside the computer case. So if I ever take that out, I will have this and it won't be lost. Well, there we go. There's a Gotek in this Tandy 1000HX. So a few points to keep in mind. You got to cut those pins off. You got to make sure that you check where pin 1 is on the cable, because don't plug it in backwards. If you do, it kills the Gotek. Also, you have to use the SETUPHX program to actually activate the disk drive. So if you put the Gotek in your HX and it doesn't seem to be working, you need to check that it's configured in the EEPROM. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out the other Sep-Tandy videos on my fellow YouTubers' channels. I'll put that down in the description. You can have links to everyone's channels. There'll be a bunch of Tandy videos on all sorts of different and very cool machines. If you like this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do. Thumbs down. You can subscribe for more videos. There will be more Sep-Tandy videos on my channel as well this month. And thank you for watching. Bye.